To illustrate it from another standpoint, when we talk about patterns, it can be something as simple as, I don't know, for instance, a repetitive, heated conversations with your partner.
So what I talk about is that anytime you have an emotion, your mind is calling for an action.
Yes.
What's the purpose of fear? It's to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So here's where the issue comes in, what I call a glitch or an error message.
So here we have something that is being expressed, which is the relationship between the masculine and the feminine polarity that is happening through our life, but through different characters, through different people. And we can let go of that if we want to.
Welcome to my podcast, You Must Be Out of Your Mind.
And the gentleman I have on today, there couldn't be a better connection in what he does and what we do. Arnaud Saint-Paul is an entrepreneur. He's been a social entrepreneur for a long time, worked in technology and finance, got a great program that we're going to learn a lot more about here today. I'm going to share that with you. So welcome, Arnaud, to You Must Be Out of Your Mind.
Thank you very much for having me.
Very good. Well, I know you're in Europe right now, and we're in the freezing Florida weather. So, but you've got great weather there.
Yeah, we've got the Florida weather here and vice versa.
Very good. So can you share with our audience a little bit about what you do and what you've done? I know you've got a great career over the last 30 years and helping a lot of people. So maybe share a little insight rather than me try to do it.
Let's try that. When I was 13, I woke up spiritually, and which brought me to this quest of answering the question, who am I? And when I became adult, I started in finance, and then very quickly thereafter creating startups at the early days of the internet in Europe first, and then in the US. And at the same time was progressing in my understanding of this human experience that helped me relate to what I was living on a day-to-day basis, and at the same time understand what is the journey on which we are, right? As a species, as an individual, as part of organizations, and create a series of processes that would help me to go beyond the challenges that life brings to us, as always, right? We are all receiving so many challenges at the same time, and when you're an entrepreneur, it's multiplied by X.
Exactly.
And then you have to find a way to not only cope with it, but more importantly, why are they there, and how I can go beyond them and transcend them and become a better person in the process. And so came together as I was creating my companies and helping investors, simple charts that would enable me to have a coherent understanding of, from a scientific standpoint, but also from a philosophy and religion standpoint, what is this life we are in, and how to live more from my heart than from my mind, and analyzing everything, etc. And came together what I call today a heartful method, which is a process that we can learn in 90 days to help us really understand the language of life, meaning all these challenges are coming our way, or things that seem to be a bit out of scope or hurtful sometimes, to help us not only relate to them in a better way, but also find the source or where that comes from, so that it doesn't repeat itself in the future. Because, as you know, life is made of patterns always.
Yeah.
And it is great to be able to process one pattern and be in a space that is more in harmony with ourselves. But it's better if I am able to identify where that pattern is coming from, release the initial emotional trauma that was there, like what you do in your method, and then let go of it, and then the pattern won't repeat itself again ever.
Yep.
So that's the heartful method, is really learning the language of life and once we become aware of it, helping ourselves to let go of whatever was being expressed, and then be freer than before, so we can be a better person. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, perfect sense. It's really interesting because you talk about you had your spiritual awakening at 13. I had a very interesting experience at 13 as well. So my background was a lot of sports. So I was raised in Canada. Hockey was my number one sport. Tennis was my second sport. But just sort of talking about how with entrepreneurs, I remember the pro who was teaching me, this guy was the best player I'd ever seen. I mean, he just never lost. He beat every pro in the city and handily, not even close. Mm-hmm. And so I would trade lessons with him for doing workouts with his students. So I'd run drills in exchange. So he really he was sort of a mentor of mine. And at about 13, he sat me down one day and he says, "You really want to be a great tennis player, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he looks around to make sure no one's listening. And he says, "Okay, so I'm going to tell you the secret." And at 13, you actually think there is a secret, right? And I'm like, "Oh, this is it. I'm going to have the secret," right? And he looks at me and he goes, "Lose a lot." And I said, "What do you mean lose a lot?" And I said, "I don't understand what you mean." And he says, "You're playing in the 13, 14-year-old divisions in these tournaments, and you can win in those divisions." He says, "I want you to play in the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old divisions." Mm-hmm. Now, they're bigger and stronger and faster, so they're going to beat you. He says, not because you're not a good athlete, but you just haven't seen that speed. And he says, "But you will learn very quickly how to adjust to that speed based on the athletic ability. But until you see it, you don't know what it looks like." Mm-hmm. He says, "The problem with it is you're going to lose a lot." He says, "But you're going to become a better player." That was just great life advice besides just tennis advice. And I've used that a lot because every time you have a loss, you have to sort of chalk it up as part of your experience, part of, like you just talked about, recognizing a pattern. What did that guy do to beat me, right? How did he take advantage of my weakness, right? So maybe my backhand was weaker, right? And this guy was good enough to recognize it and just beat me with it. So same kind of thing that you're just talking about, right? The patterns.
Yes. And to illustrate it from another standpoint, when we talk about patterns, it can be something as simple as, I don't know, for instance, a repetitive, heated conversations with your partner. That's one type of pattern. Okay, yep. And I think everybody can relate to that one way or another. A little bit different is when we have repetitive, heated conversations with women in general, for a guy, or not necessarily. So here we have something that is being expressed, which is the relationship between the masculine and the feminine polarity that is happening through our life, but through different characters, through different people. And we can let go of that if we want to, if we make a conscious choice in that direction. And it really, when I work with CEOs, we can find patterns that express in different ways. Renting, so in the same week, we have a problem with renting a car, an issue with a contract, a company that is showing up and duplicating our content, without the right to do so. But it's always the same pattern that is being expressed through different forms. And then we can release them if we want to.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I talk about too, is from the brain standpoint, our brain is coding. It codes all the time. It's coding every experience for you. And it then puts together those patterns so it can recognize it, so it knows how to respond to it. So if something was painful, it can recognize that. But it also codes to protect you, right? To keep you safe. So I have a very different approach to addiction. I talk about addiction as a code. It's not a disease.
Yeah.
The mind is trying to protect you from pain. And your subconscious mind is always present in the moment. It's your survival brain. So it wants to stop pain now. It sees no consequences to actions because it has no connection to time. It's only the conscious mind that can see and relate to time.
Mhm.
So your conscious mind would say, well, I shouldn't be repeating this because I'm going to build an addiction. But your subconscious mind says, we're in pain now. And it
Mhm.
wants the pain to stop. And survival always overrides reason and logic.
Okay.
And that's why people get stuck in addiction. And that code gets built and basically magnified every time you repeat it.
Mhm.
And so what we do is we shame and guilt these people when in fact we need to understand that they couldn't have done it any differently,
Exactly.
right? That's just the
Exactly.
way the mind works. And I'll have people say to me, you probably have heard this all the time with entrepreneurs, well, I sabotaged myself. And my answer to that is it's impossible. You can't sabotage yourself. Your brain is designed to survive. It will create a way around a problem that may look like sabotage, but it was trying to protect you to stay away from that hurt and that pain.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I can completely see that. Indeed, the question I have for you actually is, so that coding you're mentioning, it's coding the experience itself, or the relationship with the experience itself, right?
Yeah, so it's coding, it actually records the experience. And then what it does is it builds up basically codes on how, if it repeats itself. So if somebody has had multiple issues with trauma, it will try to figure out what's the best way to respond to this trauma and will
Mhm.
create a code. And that's why I
Mhm.
said like addiction could become a code, anger becomes a code. So what I talk about is that anytime you have an emotion, your mind is calling for an action.
Yes.
What's the purpose of fear? It's to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So if here's where the issue comes in, what I call a glitch or an error message. If you think about something that happened to you 10 years ago and you feel angry or you feel scared, that's the glitch. You should be able to recall that event. This is what I think you do in your program really well.
Yes.
You can recall that event as an experience to be able to use it as a tool to respond better, right? And to build a new code. What I fix is the glitch where the emotions are coming in all the time,
Right.
disrupting your nervous system.
Right. To illustrate what you're saying, from a CEO standpoint, in this case, I had that gentleman who had in the same week a company that was copying their website completely, without them knowing in the first place. A conversation with an employee who was lying on his application, and a third thing that I don't remember. And so the main topic for that week was integrity. So the CEO, because in the framework I offer to people, one thing that is like an axiom is that reality acts as a mirror. And I'm not versatile enough in the neuron, the mirror neuron and so on to talk about that. But what I have experienced in my life and with all the people I've helped so far is that every single character in my reality acts as a mirror of me. So in this case, these issues with the different people were showing up for the CEO to address the problem of inner integrity. How, when was it not in integrity with the other people? And indeed, when he was 15, he would, for whatever happened in that time, he had lacked integrity, and he was still carrying that out across years. So 20 years later, expressing in different ways now. And this needed to be completely changed. So we were able to do that in the session. And then the following week, really fell out of the blue, a 9-figure contract. They were never done that so far, which from a very prominent financial establishment, and showing that we're back into something that is more harmonious. And that's the power of patterns and releasing them.
Are you tired of dealing with stress, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, even feeling broken? Have traumatic events and experiences in your life created post-traumatic stress for you? Perhaps you're an athlete, an executive, trying to reach that next level of performance. Well, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your mind. Your mind is dealing with some glitches and error messages as a result of these traumatic events or disturbing events earlier in your life. It's interfering with your ability to stay present because the memory keeps on looping, activating your nervous system. I've helped thousands of people deal with anxiety, panic attacks, depression, feeling that sense of brokenness. We can clear that in as little as 4 hours. Check out our website, inspiredperformanceinstitute.com, and check out some of the stories and testimonials. Some of these may relate to what you've experienced in your life, and we look forward to helping you reach your next level of performance. And there it is. Yeah, and then I always talk about it as atmospheric conditions. So if you understood the atmospheric conditions of somebody's life growing up, you'd understand why they behave the way they behave. So if they grew up, so I talk about my wife's childhood. She grew up in a very traumatic household with a very angry father. So her atmospheric conditions were very dark and stormy. So she had this constant sense of fear around her all the time, because that's the way her mind was developing as a child, right? And she didn't live in a safe environment. I lived in the exact opposite. I had this amazing, nurturing, no fear environment. My brother and sister and I can't ever remember my parents arguing. That's a very unique childhood.
Yeah.
So I grew up with this sense of safety all the time. And so when I would, go out into the world, I had a very, very clear atmospheric condition, but I had to understand that not everybody had that. So just like you were talking about the gentleman who maybe had, something happened to him earlier, that created a code that I need to protect myself and do something to protect myself. Right?
Yeah. I always share with the people working with me one thing that is super simple. We always, always, always do the best we can. We are always the best version of ourselves. It may not be seen as such from the outside, so to speak. I may consider that you did not do your best at that moment. But in reality, within the scope of what you could do, you tried your best. And maybe, it applies to our parents. We think they could have loved us more, or etc., but they did their best in that time, at every moment. And the same applies to anyone. And by understanding that, by living by it, all of a sudden everything becomes much simpler. And we can really surf and let go of the reaction mode that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and that's why I refer to it as atmospheric conditions, so that if you understood that somebody had grown up with some very dark atmospheric conditions, their mind uses those experiences to filter through. So I talk about it, think about if you have a filter, right? And you take water, and water are the thoughts, and you pour the water through the filter, the water comes out clear. But if you put mud in the filter and then you pour the water through the filter, the water comes out muddy. So what's wrong with the water? Nothing. It filtered through the mud. How could it not come out muddy? Right? Yeah. All you have to do is go in and clean out the filter so that the mind stops using those old traumatic patterns to respond to what's happening now. And it's a human condition. There's nothing wrong with anybody. There's nothing wrong with anybody's mind. And that's what I say to them, is that if I'd lived your life the way you lived your life, I couldn't be doing things any differently. It's just the way our mind responds. So when I work with people who they'll come in and they'll say, well, I have really bad anxiety, I have depression. I say, well, no, those are symptoms. It's not what you have, right? You didn't catch depression, right? Depression is something that's a response. And what I talk about is depression is not a dysfunction of the brain. It's actually a function of the brain. The mind has been trying to fix something for a long time, and it can't fix it. So it's been trying to change your childhood, for example, right? Don't let dad, hurt us, or whatever that. Well, they can't do it because it doesn't exist anymore. but your subconscious mind's operating in the present. So it will continue to use anger to get you into an action to do something about it. If you can't do anything about it, how does your mind protect you? It shuts down. Depression is the absence of emotions. It stops using the emotion of anger because it can't get the result. So it protects you. Once you resolve what your mind has been trying to get done, the depression lifts. It's really that simple. So that's a function, not a dysfunction.
Yeah. No.
So the same thing with ADHD. You know, when people will say, well, I have ADHD, and I say, well, what do you think that is? Well, you know, it's I can't focus, I can't think. And I said, did you have a very traumatic childhood? Did you have a lot of stuff going on in your childhood? Oh, yeah, I had a really tough childhood. I said, well, let's look at it this way. You and I are two adults sitting here having a conversation, right? If we get into a disagreement, you have two options. You can argue back and fight back, or you can walk away, fight or flight. A child can't do either. They can't fight back and they can't run away. So their options are zero. So their brains are just developing at this stage. So what's the only way the brain has to defend you, to protect you?
Shut down. Yeah.
Tune everything out. Shut it all down. Don't listen so that you don't have to absorb all of this negative, right, stuff that's going on around you. So now your brain is being trained to shut down all the noise. And then we take that child and we stick him into a classroom with 30 other children and say, now it's time to focus. How in the world could they focus? They've trained their brain for years to shut down. And then we want to blame them. There's something wrong with them, right? When in fact, they've just been trained to do that.
Yeah, no, completely. I resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah. And so what you're doing is working with a lot of, you know, people who are coming in just like we are, who are coming in not understanding it. They think there's something wrong when there's nothing wrong. It's just the way their system has managed their lives through all their experiences. And all we have to do is get to the root of it.
Yes. And learning how to do it on our own is, you know, miles better, because this way we can really become the master of our lives and move on. And obviously, thanks to, you know, your technology, we can take care of the big stuff like PTSD or depressions, because these are, you know, heavy to let go of, and having a systematic way to wash the plate, so to speak, is amazing. And then after that, to be able to acquire a certain discipline where I can observe my life and being able to become present to it and aware, and then decide what is the new choice, what is the new pattern, what is the new direction I want to go towards. And so, in other words, reframing my brain and my subconscious, I imagine, I'm not a specialist, but I would guess it is. And so that all of a sudden I am free of that and it won't show up anymore. I think that's, life become magical.
It does, you know, and that's why we called our program a performance program, not trauma therapy. It's all built around performance. What's interfering with you reaching your highest level of performance? In most cases, it's trauma. Trauma keeps looping and protecting you, right? Creating all kinds of emotions, sensations, and feelings, right, that are interfering with your ability to stay present and in the moment and perform at your highest level. So I love working with athletes because we can see the results very quickly with athletes. One of the things that I talk about that I found in our research is that we actually affect the ATP, the mitochondria in the cell. When there is unresolved trauma, that's pulling energy away from the metabolism. So what happens is if you take an athlete who's dealing with this, they're going to have some effect on their performance. So I worked with a number of different athletes. For example, I worked with Rob Killian. Do you know the Spartan races?
No.
They're these long distance marathon obstacle courses. They have them all over the world.
Okay.
And so I was speaking at the Spartan World Championships in 2019, and Rob Killian was running in the World Championship on Sunday. And a lady who runs Spartan Japan asked if I could work with him on before the race to see if I could improve his performance. Now, there were 3 guys at the time that were dominating almost all the races around the world. They were the best of the best, and they were winning. And Rob was a great athlete, but he wasn't in those top 3. So anyway, I worked with Rob, and what I explained to Rob is when we release this trauma, we're actually going to improve the energy in the cell.
Oh, wow.
And I said, so that's my target for you. So Rob went through the program on Friday, ran in the World Championships on Sunday, and beat them all. And what I said to him is, I said, Rob, I didn't make you a faster runner. You were always that fast. We just released the energy that was running on this trauma loop. We released that, you could run faster, right? He always had that ability. And I've got all kinds of examples of it. And what was really interesting is just last week, we did an event for a group who work on performance athletes. And they came in and went through I took them through the group presentation. And one of the guys said to me, he said, I just figured something out, what you were just talking about. He said, we didn't understand why some of these athletes that we were training and working with, they were doing the heart math coherence, to sort of see. We didn't understand why they kept falling into a sympathetic nervous system response. Now we know why. That was why. He says, without that getting cleared out of the way, it's definitely going to affect performance. And that's what this guy did. Always. Yep. And so even for like CEOs and entrepreneurs, just like you were talking about, those contracts that the guy probably got, or maybe just passing them because he couldn't focus, right? So there were opportunities passing him by, but when he becomes 100% present, all of a sudden it looks like something fell in his lap when he had that opportunity all along.
Maybe. I mean, in my understanding, so, we push the boundaries of how reality works quite far from what you were describing, in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, reality is a reflection of me, and therefore the moment I release these ATP, or whichever was the adequate term earlier, all of a sudden new potentials can show up, and indeed show up with, for instance, that agreement, or this winning by your athlete. So, but basically we're saying exactly the same thing. It's just that we believe, and that's what is being shown in our reality every day, that the moment you let go of these patterns, a new world of potential shows up, and you can tap into it and really thrive much more than before in all aspects of your life.
I had a gentleman, he worked for a pharmaceutical company. He was making a pretty good salary, about $250,000 a year. And he said, but I really want to be an entrepreneur. And he said, but that scares me. He says, I like the idea that every week I have a paycheck and I pay my mortgage and my kids have food on the table. He says, it scares me to think about not having that. He says, but that's my dream. And so once we got him through, we got to the root of where that's coming from. 6 months later, he's an owner in a microbrewery, and he's making 10 times that.
Wow.
And he says, I would never have done that, because, just like you talked about, that pattern would have interrupted his ability to see that opportunity, right? And to be present for it. Yeah.
Another example, which happened to me a month ago, actually, but not much more than that, all of a sudden I became aware of a pattern. So an issue related to my father, who did not want children, and that was still limiting me in my day-to-day, and more importantly, the company I'm building now. But I did not know, I was not conscious of that, right? So I become aware of the trauma itself. I'm able to release it. The next day start to fall many different opportunities. One of them is meeting you.
Right.
And another one was a few $1 million contract where we're going to have 350 entrepreneurs that we're going to be able to have to go through the Heartful Method.
Nice.
And I wouldn't even think about it. And all of a sudden, poof, it shows up. And then now we're starting the presentations in January. So it's really, we have everything in our hands if we want to. Just as you said earlier, the moment we are able to release whatever is stopping us, and whether it shows as depression or fights or emotional reactions, etc., which are just the symptoms, then all of a sudden, you know, the world is our oyster. Everything comes our way without effort. And by just becoming more and more present and in this moment, and be the best version of ourselves, of course.
Yeah. And like you said, everybody is trying to do that, but if they've got a lot of, you know, those patterns, those atmospheric conditions filtering through, right, it's going to have an effect on the way they see the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Yes.
of course it would. How could it not, right? That's just the way our mind. I always use the analogy of, if you walk 2 miles every day to get food, and there were snipers and landmines along that route, but every day you managed to get there and you got back. And then somebody says, well, there's a really convenient public store, like a grocery store just up the road that way. It's really safe. You don't need to walk those 2 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Your mind won't go there.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to repeat over, and you have to walk down 5 yards and then 10 yards. And then eventually, what I say is that repetition is research for the mind. It sees it as research, right? Okay, you're right. This is true, right? Because you repeated it and you built a code, you built a pattern that was able to override, just like a computer codes all the time. Your brain's coding what's safe, what's not safe. And it won't just make a change for the sake of making a change until it has evidence that the change is safe.
Okay.
Like even the codes that you get into now came from a pattern of something that had happened. It didn't start instantly, it built up.
And what I've observed as well is changing patterns usually takes a bit more energy than continuing the same pattern, a bit or a lot. And it involves effort for the individual because it's new, as you said earlier, so it's uncomfortable. And at the same time, because it's new, it's creating a new paradigm, a new world, a new atmosphere, and that entails a lot of courage on the person's behalf to enable that, to enable that transformation. So
yeah, and it's a natural, like, but a lot of people, it takes intention. This is the way I always tell people.
Yes.
It takes intention to make a change to a pattern. It's just not going to happen naturally. Your mind will always fall back to its fail safe. It will always fall back to what kept you safe, even if it's not in your best interest, right? It still kept you safe. So I give an example of, this isn't obviously a life-threatening thing, but I had bought a set of new golf clubs, and then the pro who gave me the clubs said, oh, you get a free lesson with the clubs. I'll videotape you and we'll look at your swing. So he did, and he came back and he says, I have one little thing that I'd mention if you want me to tell you about it. And I said, sure. And so he mentioned one of the things that I did on my backswing. I was dipping a little bit on my one shoulder. So he says, he says, you're a good athlete and you tend to correct it. So he says, but if you don't correct it, you're going to hit the ground a little bit before, right? So he said, I would make that change. So I thought that makes a lot of sense. So I went out to play the next day with my friend, and I said to him, I'm working on a new swing change. I said, so I'm not going to keep score today, right? You can keep your score. I'm just working on this swing change. So I noticed that about the third hole, he had marked down a score for me. And I said, yeah, don't mark my score down. I don't want to worry about my score. And he's, well, I'm just sort of keeping track. He wanted to beat me, right? So he's keeping track. And I said, don't do that. I said, if I start focusing on the score, I'm not going to be able to make this swing change. So finally on the 9th hole, I see him doing it again. And I said, what's going on? I said, I'm telling you, my mind will go back to my old swing if it feels like I'm in danger. I'm not in danger, but my mind doesn't want to lose either, right? And I was trying to illustrate to him that that's what our minds do. It will go back to the old pattern because it kept you safe.
Yeah.
We see it in sports all the time. So a pro, for example, I work with professional golfers, and a professional golfer will make a swing change. And then when he gets into pressure on Sunday, right, when it's whether he's going to win the tournament or not win the tournament, you could see the old swing come back in. Now that's all subconscious. He's not consciously doing that, but his mind will want to protect him and say, listen, we know we can do this. Why mess around with this? Let's stay safe.
And would you say that there is also the possibility of having the mix of both the new and the old swing together?
Yeah,
even
it could blend it.
You could blending. Okay.
Yeah.
In a process of evolving towards the new, there is still that blending in and out towards the new pattern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, it's going to code it, and so the code's either really strong or it's not yet, right? So it could have some sort of a blend of the code.
Okay.
But if it really gets into a fear state, and I use sports all the time because it's such a good one. You take a professional athlete, and the difference between first place and second place could be $500,000, right? Well, that can be a lot. Or if the guy's never won before, it's his first time being able to win. It's the security of being on tour for another 5 years. So you could see where that pressure would come in, and you could see how his mind would say, like, let's go back to what got us here. Let's go back to the pattern we know, right? And it will go back to that just to protect him without him even realizing it. And if you asked him, why did you make that swing there? He'll tell you he didn't do anything different. He had the swing the way he was supposed to. No, he didn't. That's why even the top pros in the world have coaches, because their coaches can point that out to them. It feels like they did it the right way, but their mind, and again, at that level, the changes are small, but the mind will make that adjustment to go back to what kept you safe.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. But then at some point, they completely release the old way, and it never happens again.
Yeah.
Right?
I look at it the same way as a computer, right? So you're basically writing new code over top of the old code. Eventually, the old code is just so deep, right? The new code is what is always on the top, and it just goes to the new code.
Okay.
Just like keystrokes.
And talking about coding, actually, one of the things that I present in the Heartful Method, but it's funny because it's the Heartful Method. It's living through the heart, but we're talking a lot about the brain because obviously it's part of the process, right?
Yeah.
So I present the brain waves and how they develop across our age. So from 0 to 7 and 0 to 3, if I'm not mistaken, and so on and so forth. And after 12 years old, we get beta 1, 2, 3. And could we surmise that each brainwave is a layer of code?
Oh, for sure.
That I can go deeper and deeper. If I go from beta to theta and so on, I would access the deeper code where I can reprogram the upper layers from that place more easily, right?
Absolutely. So we can constantly change those. We're not stuck in it. That's why when people come in and they'll say, I have this, right? Well, yeah, but you want to change it, right? You don't want to be like that anymore, right? Then let's recode it, right? And you do that through repetition and repeating something over and over. And then you're just going to build a new code. Same thing with just the brain. If your brain is in a high beta state and you want to calm it down, then you have to train it to calm down in those situations. It's just not, you just can't will it. The conscious mind will not override that under any circumstances. It's always the subconscious mind that does all the coding. The conscious mind is just working on it for you.
The coding that happens in delta, theta, and then beta. So can we also surmise that the coding I have in theta is also being repeated in a slightly different way in delta that is repeated in beta, meaning it's kind of a cone where this little code affects all the other aspects at a higher, of the upper layers.
Yeah, I always think about it this way. You have 100% of energy in your brain, for example. Where's that energy going to go? If a majority is going into one area, the frontal lobe, you're going to be anxious, right? Because it's going to be an overload of power going to that part of the brain. And so it's not meant to do that. Your executive functioning, right, part of your brain. So if you have high beta in there or you have delta, you're going to be flat. And you're not, so it's going to be depending on how the brain uses the power and what it's trying to accomplish. And you can see that. So we did brain mapping on people. We do a brain map prior to the session, and then we do a brain map 30, 60, or 90 days after the session. And we got about a 45% change in brain plasticity after the program. Because when we resolve the trauma, we move a lot of that energy that had been stored up, right, to resolve the problem. And now it starts to normalize and starts going back into the way it should be. So no matter what your brain map shows, you can correct it.
Yeah.
And we're proving that just by simply addressing the trauma side of it. And then doing what you're doing as well, you can also use the conscious mind, right, to start using the intention to make the change that the subconscious mind will do.
That's what we do, indeed.
Yeah,
exactly.
So you have like a 90-day kind of a program.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about what they're doing during the 90 days.
The 90 days, it's a weekly call with myself and also a weekly video that helps the individual. So we have two waves. The wave number one, which is the first month, where we learn how to relate to events, not in an unconscious way, in the sense of where we react automatically, but we'll learn a process of how to push a pause button and then get into more harmony with the event. So it's a very simple process, but it needs practice, hence the 4 weeks. And then after that, we have the wave two, which is 2 months, where we go deeper in that process. And at the same time, we go through quantum physics principles, Eastern philosophies, etc., to learn, that way of living through the mind, way of living through the heart, and what it means, and what can we choose for our own experience. So the second wave goes deeper into that process where I learn how to listen to the incidents of life, so to speak, within a week, for instance, as I was illustrating earlier, and then decode the trauma that was happening before. That was the seed of that is being showing up in our lives. And then once we do that, we're able to release it. So learning that process so that across 90 days, we have all the tools, whether it's an individual, a mother at home, or a CEO, it's exactly the same thing. It's just that CEOs have more incentive to make it happen for themselves. So we have all the tools to shift our perception and our experience and our reality automatically. And this is a tool that we all have. It's available to everyone. We all have the capacity to do it, if we choose to, obviously. And so by the end of the 3 months, you are able to really continue working in our community, of course, if you choose to, and process these events that are happening in your life, or people work with their peer. So, one-on-one, they can work together and learn the process themselves. Yeah.
Well, it sounds amazing. I mean, I love what you're doing. We're doing a lot of things to help a lot of people. There's a lot of synergy between what we're doing. So I look forward to, learning about a lot more about how we can, maybe help each other and work together.
That would be amazing, for sure.
Yeah.
We will do that. And yes, just to complete beyond this process, we have cruises as well on the Nile, where we can have a deep and strong experience of harmony, because the end result of what you are doing, what we are doing, is providing an experience in our day-to-day of more presence, more harmony, more coherence, more alignment, and therefore more performance, obviously. Yep. And that is priceless. So the ideas of the cruise are there to help us using the environment, the atmosphere of these temples to making really big shifts, but invite more and more harmony and coherence in our life. And so that's all that we are working on to help the people who wants to go through our methods to really make a step up for themselves and shift their life as much as they want and as much as they have the intention for to do it.
Yep. The intention, that was the key word. That's what we were just talking about. You have to have the intention to do it, because it's otherwise you'll just fall back into the old patterns if you're not willing to make the changes.
And it is possible to let go of the patterns. It's not a problem. We have the proof of it. I mean, you and I, and the people we're working with. That's not an issue. It's just learning, going through the right method, going through one that resonates better. Is it the brain? Is it the heart? Doesn't really matter. The bottom line is we can make it happen for ourselves.
Excellent. So somebody wants to reach out and find out more about, what you're doing with your cruises, retreats, and things like that. How do they find out about it?
They can go on our website, tapuat.com. You'll put the link on on the info below the video, I guess. And go there. There's a lot of information about the method and the cruises, and be happy to receive you guys, or ladies for that matter.
Beautiful. Well, I look forward to working more in the future with you and learning a lot more about what you do. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for everybody for listening to another episode of You Must Be Out of Your Mind. And there it is.
Because once I have full control, that will help me in the 100. I mean, part of my reason why I'm struggling in the 100 is my reaction time as well, because I'm also thinking about too much, right in the blocks, and then the gun goes off, and then I'm always that person out the blocks.
Yep.
And but every time I'm in the turn, I'm always leading.
And that's really the key, right? Is to get in with the right people or the right coaches.
It's very important. If you don't have the right people, if you don't have the right, just the right staff, if your mic's not right, all those little things are important.